Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Bob Maniger, and it is my pleasure, and I am thrilled to introduce to you Dr. Sam Sullivan, who will be directing some thoughts on a last lecture. The last lecture is an event where there's not a whole lot of rules to it. It's simply, if you had one last lecture to give and an audience, what would you say? And I know Dr. Sullivan has prepared for us some thoughts along those lines. Dr. Sullivan has served over 50 years in education, over 45 years here at Sam Houston State. So he brings a lot of wisdom and to this event, and I appreciate that. But most importantly, Dr. Sullivan has been a good friend of mine for a dozen years, and I appreciate him coming to do this. So without further ado, Dr. Sam Sullivan.
Thank you, Dr. Maniger. You would think that after 52 years of standing in front of a group that you wouldn't get nervous. The last time I was this nervous was in the mid-90s. I had made the short goal on the Walker County Team Roping Championship, and it was at the Walker County Fair, hometown crowd, rodeo. Most of them knew me, and my team roping partner was all-around world champion roper Joe Beaver. I'm sure some of you heard of Joe. When I backed into the box, I was thinking two things. One, don't throw up, and two, don't fall off my horse. So today I'm thinking two things. One, don't throw up, and two, don't make such a mess of this presentation. I don't have enough time in my professional career to undo the image. I'm very honored to be here because I'm following a long list of distinguished guests who've appeared in this particular series. 3 deans, including our latest dean, Stacy Edmondson, Dean Bruce, as well as the founder of the local effort of the last lecture, Dr. Bob Maniger. So it's quite an honor to be here. The theme of my presentation today is I'm a very lucky man, and there's a lot of reasons for that as we go through. A couple of years ago, I went in for my annual checkup, which I'd been doing for 20 years, expecting the doctor would fuss at me about my cholesterol or need to lose a little weight or exercise more. But I got a little bit different news. But the doctor came in and said, Sam, I think you've got cancer. So I looked at the data points and it suggested I did. So we would have to dig deeper and run more tests. And what it does is wake you up with that dreaded word cancer, get your attention, and makes your life come into focus. But I'm lucky. It was caught early and treatable. During my career here, I've served under 5 presidents, 5 provosts, 7 deans. Been a teacher in 6 different decades. I don't know how many department chairs and program coordinators I worked under. A couple of them was myself. But I like Dr. Zeus's statement, don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened. And that's truly the way I feel. I was a history teacher, and I would have students ask me, does history repeat itself? And my standard reply to them was, only those fools who don't learn from it. But I'm not sure that it actually repeats itself because our context change, priorities shift. We never really come back to the same place. But what does bother me is that if we don't learn from our past events, we're not going to learn a whole lot. Over my career, I've made a couple of dumb decisions. I've made a whole bucket load of mediocre decisions, and I've made a couple of brilliant decisions. Back in the early 90s, I was the program coordinator for the Instructional Materials Center and the Instructional Technology Center on the third floor of the Education Building, which is now all occupied by the Doctoral Center. I had the privilege of, as a program coordinator, recommended to Dean Craycraft that he hire Bob Garrett as our Instructional Technology Director. And those of you that know Bob Garrett know that was a brilliant decision. I can't claim too many brilliant decisions, but that's one of them. I have served 1/3 of Sam Houston history. And our college is changing. But we need to be careful not to lose how we got here in the first place. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of presenting and a little bit of preaching today. And I come by that naturally because my brother was a pastor all his life. My uncle was a preacher, and I married one. Now, wives tend to preach sometimes anyway, but when you marry one, you're subject to a double dose. Most of it deserved. But you'll probably notice when I get from presenting to preaching. I want to do a little historical comparison. In 1973, our total enrollment was 9735. Now, this is after the drop day and the 12th day. 2018, the total enrollment is 19,000 something. I think right now it's 21,000 currently. 1973, the College of Education had 3,542 students, which is 36% of the university's population. Remember, we started as a teacher training institution, and we got our reputation from establishing a teacher training institution, but that's all changed. Notice in 2018, the College of Education had 3,593. But only 18% of this college comes from the College of Education. We've only gained like 50-something students in the last 45 years, but we've lost tremendously the percentage across campus of our students. An interesting note is that in 1973, we had 9-week summer sessions. So a student could take 9 hours, 12 with permission during the summer. It was pushed then that we go to 2 4.5-week sessions for convenience, as well as it would increase enrollment. It was supposed to dramatically increase summer enrollment. Well, if you look at these particular figures, it did just the opposite. It dropped in enrollment. And quite frankly, I think what we did was sacrifice quality for convenience during the summer. Very few students currently take both sessions 6 hours at a time. They will take either the first session or the second session, or they'll take 3 and 3 or something of that nature. The teacher education program, we had a half-time release for one professor who was the certification officer. Notice there were no associate deans of planning and assessment, no associate dean of educational preparation or graduate studies. We didn't have a field experience director, TK20, or department chairs. So you look at all these administrative positions that we currently have, and the question that comes to mind, why? And for what purpose? And I think there are 2 main reasons. There's a lot of other reasons, but I think there are 2 main ones. The increase in testing, accountability, and regulations, and the shifting role of the faculty. And I think the second one is probably the biggest reason for that particular change. Because what was once just a part of our job is now a merit, or it's shifted to some other particular reasons. we were quite large as a faculty. For example, this is just the secondary ed faculty. This is not the College of Education faculty, but just secondary ed faculty. You'll notice suits and ties. We had a dress code. We were expected to meet the standards of the public schools in this area, and so we had to wear suits and ties. I don't think you see too many suits and ties for faculty now teaching a class. This was our building. If you're wondering where that is, it was destroyed several years ago. If you leave the administration building on the south side, go towards the Evans building, it was there. It's probably 20 feet from the administration building on the south side. Interesting that if you walk along that sidewalk, you'll see a lot of symbols of the earth. There are metal symbols along that particular sidewalk. And that was right out in front of this particular building. We were crowded because most classes were face-to-face. The only ones that were not face-to-face were the ones that we had off campus. It got hot in that building in the summer because the air conditioner didn't work all that well. And so if you had 40 or 50 students in a classroom with the windows open, it got rather warm. When we moved into our new building, our offices were small, and they were designed that way on purpose. Now, a lot of you in the faculty, you complained about the size of your office, that it was too small. But if you come out of an office and where you've got 3 people trying to share the same office, you want a small office because you don't want anybody else trying to share it. For example, in instructional technology, or we called it the audiovisual center at that time, our office had 5 people in it. We had 3 faculty members and 2 graduate assistants. We couldn't be in there at the same time. We had to rotate. My office was a drafting table. Can kind of tell you what the situation was in that particular office. It was small on purpose. The teacher we prepared in 1973 was as effective for that time as we prepared in 2018. The reputation of Sam Houston was earned a long time ago. But our tools may have changed, but our purpose hasn't. Our job still is preparing educators for success needed in their world. Sure, what they need today is a little bit different than what they needed then in some aspects. But they need a people person in that classroom to relate to those students, and they needed it then. Not a whole lot of change in that regard. The reputation of Sam Houston was earned long before Blackboard. Your job is to continue that tradition of caring, learning, and growing. We're in a people business. Everything else is a tool, and we forget that quite often. Quite often in a blaze of glory, we let the tool become the master, not the servant. And that's something we certainly need to keep in mind. One of my favorite quotes regarding this is that the stripes on that highway of education we travel down was painted by somebody else. Your job is to keep the painting going and keep it bright. Over the last 20 years, I've been supervising post-bac students, those students who graduate and come back for teacher certification and go out and get a job. And if you look at this, this covers pretty well most of Texas. I've been in over a third of the districts in Texas and most towns in Texas. I don't think that's bad for a country boy from Oklahoma to travel that particular area. Most people, when they do T-test evaluation, come in, and of course it's required on that T-test evaluation form that first thing you ask for is objectives and lesson plans. I ask for those, but not first. I tell my interns when I come to see them, I want to see this in a prominent place in your classroom. If you think about that, you've got a teacher in a classroom of 20, 25 students. They've got 5, 6 periods a day. And you add that 500 classrooms. That's a lot of public school students that have been exposed to Sam Houston State University. I've always considered my salary well justified for the recruitment. You notice also the shirt I'm wearing is that I wear this when I go out. So when I stop for a lunch or stop at a hotel or when I'm in the principal's office, hallway, Sam Houston State University is always in the forefront. 300 districts, 500 classrooms. Seen a lot of bad lessons in good districts and good lessons in bad districts. And there are some things that I've picked up along the way in watching those. I also work for SBAC, TEA, Educational Testing Service, making out exit exams. No form ever invented can completely capture what happens in the classroom. Some of them are better than others. I participated once in an inter-rater reliability study for TEA, and I took 5 exit exams from 5 different states. I don't recall now what the states were: New Mexico, Oklahoma, Colorado. And it was interesting to see what was considered important to teach in Colorado and what was important to teach in Texas. One of the things that come out of that is when evaluations are assessed with numbers, it shortchanges teaching, because activities that you can't quantify too well are avoided, because no test can ever capture what a student learns. It's too complex to be measured by one stick. And I say that from the experience of teaching 1,000 public school students and over 10,000 college students. On a personal note, I am an incredibly lucky man. My dad was a day laborer. He was a very physical man, concerned about the present. He was concerned about putting a roof over our heads and food on the table. Never mind that the roof leaked most of the time and there wasn't a whole lot on the table. But he tried. His philosophy was, if you go to bed at 9 and you get up at 6, you got 15 hours a day to accomplish something. My mom would say, yes, that's true, but you need to spend 3 hours a day reading. She was a stay-at-home mom. There's 7 kids in that picture. All 7 of them have degrees. 4 of them have master's degrees, 1 a doctorate. And that was accomplished, I think, 2 things. 1 was work ethic from Dad, and 2, education. You combine those 2, and you can accomplish some things. As a result of that physical, intellectual balance, I've tried to maintain that. Now, there are some folks who say I've never been emotionally balanced, but that's okay. So, from both of those. Now, I know some of you, probably several of you, have heard about the thrill of the 8-second ride. Well, I've heard about it too, but I don't know much about it. I never was very good at that, and I never perfected the art of landing too well. But I was able to do that with my intellectual pursuits. Didn't take me long to learn I needed to drop down a little bit to something I knew a little bit more about, and that was ranch hand rodeos. And I thoroughly enjoyed those. They got a little rough at times, but they were fun. while still maintaining an intellectual pursuit. When that got a little too rough, I went to team roping, and did that until 70, age of 70, and then hung up my rope, and I don't do that. Don't compete professionally at all anymore. I noticed that we had recently acquired a 4+ run, $15 million grant to train teachers who didn't go through the regular certification program. It's not the first time that Sam Houston has had that. I was fortunate enough to be program coordinator for a $5 million grant that we did in 2001 through 2003 or somewhere along in there, which was designed as a support mechanism for first-year teachers. I also owned the Little Ponderosa Stables, owned and operated. My brother and I. It was a 50-horse stall operation with a rodeo pen, and I was also a stock contractor for a number of years. And you also notice that there were several writings in there having to do with instructional technology. Now, I was an instructional technology director for a large school district, suburban school district of Oklahoma City. At one time considered to be a leader in the technology field. But along about 2000, and I'll use one of my favorite quotes, technology passed me by like a 747 on a dirt road, leaving me in a cloud of dust. And I struggle to keep up. When I owned those stables, my kids did a lot of this, and they'll tell you that, cleaning stalls. And speaking of kids, one of the things that I'm proud of is my role as a parent to my children, which includes Plato here, that when we get old and stumble, the younger generation may be at hand. I'm turning the education over to the younger generation here, and obviously I'm going to have to turn it over to my children soon. My oldest, Denny Joe, who is currently a special ed teacher in Trinity ISD. She got 2 degrees from Sam Houston State University. She has a master's in curriculum instruction. She also rodeoed for Sam Houston. She rodeoed most of her life. Lee Eric, who rodeoed for Texas State University in San Marcos, and currently teaches Japanese to Australians in Australia. I jokingly call him trilingual. And if you don't believe that Australian is a native, third foreign language, then try listening to one sometime. You'll discover that it's almost like a foreign language. Tyler Aaron, the youngest, some of you may recognize him in that he worked as a graduate assistant in the dean's office. He was injured young and didn't have the advantage of the other two, but he certainly grew up with a lot of arena dirt on his boots. He currently teaches business at Waller High School, and he has 2 degrees from Sam Houston, including a master's curriculum and instruction. So one of the highlights of the early years was the year that all 3 of us here won trophy saddles the same year. I don't know how rare that is, but it was rare for us. I'm an exceptionally lucky man. 3 children. Out of those 3 children, there are 4 teachers. Now, if you're wondering about my fuzzy math, my youngest son, Tyler, married Sarah, who also has a certification as a kindergarten teacher from Sam Houston. Family isn't always determined by DNA either. Those 2 children in the front of that boat adopted me as their dad when they were in grade school, and still considered me their dad. They haven't run me off yet. Michael, or in Walker County, mostly known as Slim, has his own petroleum consulting firm and is a rancher here in Walker County. Dorn, who has a degree from Texas A&M, and she got her teacher certification from A&M. Now, it took me a few years to forgive her for that, but I have. Along with she's an executive assistant in the petroleum industry. Those two followed the money. They got smart. That's my grandson, James, and I'm not going to go into grandchildren because between Danielle and Alexis and Audrey and James, we would be here a while. So I'm not going to get into that. As a dad, I tried to spoil my children by spending all I could on them. Never enough, or as much as they wanted, nor as much as I wanted to spend with them. But hopefully it was what they needed. Now, I'm a college professor, so you know it's not money. What is it? Time. My story in arriving at Sam Houston started with Dr. Jack Staggs, the Director of Teacher Education in 1973. Notice, we only had a dean and we had a Director of Teacher Education. I had an opening here at Sam, and one of the faculty members either retired or resigned, I can't recall, in 1st of June. So he did what was standard in those days, and that is you got on the telephone and you did all your recruiting by telephone. There wasn't sending out across the country and taking 20 or 30 applications and having a search committee to review them and that type of stuff. It was Dr. Staggs. He called Oklahoma State. And he called Oklahoma State because they had one of the rare programs in the country at that time, and he knew it. It was a doctorate in teaching in higher ed. Currently, in most areas you get a doctorate in curriculum instruction, or you get a doctorate in ed leadership, something of that nature. I got one and was certified to teach in higher ed, and I had to do the same thing your undergraduates have to do to get certification. I had to teach pedagogy in the junior college. I had to do field experience. Field experience is not new. I had to go teach lessons. I taught lessons at the time was Oscar Rhodes Junior College, Central State University. From State University, each time I was teaching, I was evaluated by the professor. All the things you have to do in undergraduate certification I had to do in order to teach in higher ed, because I knew at that particular time that's what I wanted to do. And that's something that I always wanted to do. Whoops. Dr. Staggs called Oklahoma State, talked to my advisor, and asked me, got in contact with me, called me on the phone, and asked me to send him my resume, or we call it Vita these days. Now, how long is your Vita? Your CV, as they refer to it these days. How long is it? 20 pages? 30 pages? Guess how long mine was? 1 page. That was my CV. You notice something else there that you can't do anymore? Put your picture on it. And if you look real close, you'll notice something else. I had in there married with children. You don't see that anymore, job applications. At any rate, he looked it over, and he called me, and he said, I need you to come down for an interview. He said, I have faculty meetings 3:30 to 5 on Friday afternoons. And I kind of asked him about that. And he said, well, nobody has class at 3:30 on Friday afternoon, and nobody's in a public school, so you've got no excuses for not being here. And he was serious. You made the faculty meetings. He said, if you'll get here at 3 o'clock, I'll take you into the faculty meeting and you can attend the faculty meeting. Well, I drove a 1965 Mustang at the time, and it was what I called an 8-cylinder air conditioning system. You had 4 windows, 2 in front, 2 in the back. You had 2 side windows, and you had 2 vents under the dash. That was your air conditioning system, and we're talking about, by this time, it was July. And I left Oklahoma, and I'd never been south of Dallas. I got lost in Dallas, and I wound up in Italy, Texas. Never heard of it, but there I was. And I had a blowout. Now, Mustang sits low to the ground anyway. I had a blowout on the rear tire, and it immediately drug the tailpipe loose from the muffler. So here I am with my only good white shirt and the only good pair of jeans, and I changed the tire. Had to wait a little while till the muffler cooled off enough that I could crawl underneath there and reattach the tailpipe, sort of. Wired it up with baling wire, which in those days I always carried in every vehicle I drove. These days it's H-twine. And came home. I stopped in Buffalo and called Dr. Staggs and said, I'm going to be a little bit late. So he said, okay, from where you are, you'll probably be here pretty close to 5. And he said, I'll meet you in the parking lot south of which is payroll office, I suppose. Now it's about one of the few things that hasn't changed a whole lot. So here I come in just about 4:45. Now you can imagine the Mustang with the windows down and the muffler and tailpipe going boom, boom, boom. I had long hair. I was dirty, filthy. And he was standing there talking to who at that time was Dean Sullivan. And Dean Ryan looked at Dr. Staggs and he said, I thought you told me this guy was a diamond in the rough. That must be some kind of rough in Oklahoma because he just looked like a big old lump of coal to me. I don't know whether I ever turned out to be a diamond for Sam Houston, but it has been a good career. Job interviews in those days was considerably different. You would be sued in a heartbeat these days. But since it was Friday afternoon, Dr. Staggs told me, I still want you to meet the faculty, and he said, we do need to do some interviews. So he took me home for the weekend, and I learned truly what Southern hospitality was that particular weekend, because when I got there, his wife Kathleen, epitome of a Southern lady, went into her room and she got her robe. She brought it out and she said, now I didn't get Dr. Staggs' robe because it would drag the floor, because he was very tall. She said, I want you to go in there, take a shower, take those clothes off, and you can wear this robe. She washed and ironed my clothes that night, and I spent the weekend with her. The next day, Dr. Staggs took me around town, which you don't see a whole lot of anymore. First thing he did was to take me to G&O Barbershop and got me a haircut. I needed one. And then he took me around town to the appropriate places for faculty to live. At that time, you were required to live in Walker County. There wasn't, in the College of Education, there wasn't any such thing as living in the Woodlands or anywhere else. Your kids went to the public schools and you lived in Walker County. So he took me to a couple of the neighborhoods that, he didn't take me to Elkins Lake. He didn't bother because he knew as an assistant professor I couldn't afford Elkins Lake. Still can't. But took me to Spring Lake. He took me to Forest Hills. Forest Hills was where most of the faculty lived at the time, or the avenues. Those were acceptable. He also took me around to acceptable churches. Took me to his, and then he asked me about mine, and I told him, and he took me by there. Sunday morning, he took me by. He didn't want me driving that old Mustang around Huntsville too much. He took me to my church, and he went to his, and picked me up afterward. And then that Sunday afternoon is when he really conducted the job interview. We sat out on his porch at Spring Lake, and He asked me a whole lot of questions about my career. I had taught in the Edmond Public Schools, and I was assistant principal, and he asked me a lot of questions regarding that. So that was the interview. When he took me in on Monday morning to the faculty, he introduced me as a new faculty member. That was the way it worked. He introduced me to only key faculty members, which was quite plain that those were the faculty members that I needed to pay attention to. My first teaching assignment, if you look on down at the bottom of that, you will see 5 classes. That was not unusual for an assistant professor to have 5 classes to have a full-time position. That also included 12 student teachers. And teaching, collegiality, and service was the 3 main things that they emphasized at that time. Notice there was not any research there. It was, if you did it, great. But his philosophy was that we were teachers first and foremost. Each of the faculty were assigned a school district. I was assigned Huntsville, K through 12. So I would take all of the applications for student teaching, and I would start at the secondary level, and I would go to the high school and meet with the principal, and we'd have this stack of student teachers, and we would try to match them up with their mentors. Whatever didn't work, I would then go to the junior high and try to match those, and then I would take whatever was left back to another professor, I think David Henderson or someone, who did the Conroe organization. Now we have a field experience director that does all of that. Service was considerably different. Service was considered part of your job, and it involved service to the community. They weren't too interested in how many committee meetings you met or were a member of. It was more about what you did for the community and the area public schools. We experimented with teaching a little bit. We're still experimenting. I noticed recently we've got into a controversy over the merit system of what constitutes service and what constitutes teaching, and the arguments over the idea instrument. We played around with department chairs coming into the classroom and observing us teaching lessons, which I'm sure would create quite a controversy today if that happened. I recall that because my department chair came in and watched me about 3 times, and at the end of the year he did evaluation. One of the comments he made was, "You live in Texas now. You need to lose that Oklahoma accent." You know, that was a little bit amusing. At any rate, our service was in service to districts and communities. That's why you will see my emphasis over the years has been a part of the Huntsville community in conducting those. We were required to conduct in-service in the districts once a year of some type. My colleague, David Henderson, who's here, did commencement addresses. In fact, he was a commencement speaker for Cold Spring High School. I did one, the junior-senior banquet in Centerville once, and it was horrible. It was horrible. I never did any more commencement or banquet speeches, but we conducted our service in the community, which I've done and still do regarding that. Our work schedule, faculty meetings, as mentioned, were 3:30 to 5 every other Friday. Our office hours were 8 to 5. I can't see that happening currently. If we were not in the field experience public school, or doing an in-service, or in class, we were expected to be in our office. That was just expected 5 days a week. Public schools went from 8 to 5, faculty, so we were required to go 8 to 5. Because remember, we were role models. And you didn't leave your office at 3:45 in the afternoon, not without special permission, because Dr. Stagg would know it. We also had distance learning back then. Dr. Stagg said the professors are going to travel the distance and the students are going to do some learning. And so I taught classes in Nahea. I didn't teach in Palestine and Alvin, but some did. I taught classes in Albany and in Conroe at night. So distance learning is not new, it's just different format that we use these days. I may not have gone where I intended to go when I graduated, but I think I've ended up where I needed to be. I love this particular quote from Douglas Adams. It's been a great ride. So if you want to find me in the next couple of years, this is where I'll be. Thank you.